This is about a much bigger picture. This is about how lawmakers make laws not to protect us, we the citizens, but to protect the corporations and to allow them to do unethical behaviors that we never could get away with in society. This is not about oil and gas. This is about the collusion between our government and corporate interest for the maximum profit of the corporations, not we the people. I'd like to give you a couple examples. When the oil and gas companies came in here and they started to put together legislation, one of the things was talking about was severance tax. What severance tax is basically the royalty or the tax that's paid off of the oil and gas that's given to our state. This is the major engine that's supposed to make the economy go, the schools, the roads, all the money is supposed to come into our state. Well, when this was introduced on the floor at our Capitol, there was a gentleman from Idaho Department of Land, and he said 2.5% is a fair severance tax. This severance tax is comparable in most states. Well, he should have known better because this gentleman came from Montana and held a very similar position. His severance tax in that state is 9%. And the gas company that is currently working in this area, they, some people may say that, we should make it more affordable so they can come here and be prosperous. Well, the same gas company is happy to pay 7.5% in Texas, 12.5% in Louisiana, 7% in Oklahoma. We got lowballed. How can it benefit the state? Who's going to benefit? Then after that, what happened is our legislation got together, and there's a property tax on the wells. Well, in 2013, they took care of that too, no property tax on the wells. This money was going to go into the counties. It's not going to happen.
Did you know that the amount of that property tax was $2 million that we gave that company that is not going into our revenue in the state?
Oh, $2 million? Yeah, we're taking questions, but I appreciate that. Thank you. Then after that, what happened is that a lot of citizens got together with the commissioners and everything, and they created a Payette County ordinance. And of course, this is Gem County, but you have to be careful because what happens in Payette County, they're going to want to do the same thing in Gem County. They're not going to, it's going to be making it more difficult. It says precedent. So there basically is a road maintenance agreement. How many of you guys have ever been up to Little lately? Anybody here? Is the road a little bit differently lately? Yeah. A little bit? A lot of repair going on. This is what happens, and this is expected with industry. And that's fine, as long as they're willing to take care of what they damaged. The situation is that they have an ordinance that states that before they commence drilling, a road maintenance agreement must be in place. They're still drilling, and there's no road maintenance agreements in place whatsoever. They're actually, right now, trying to remove the road maintenance agreement. And we're trying to find money right now through our federal government and potentially our Payette County citizens, taxpayers' wallets to take care of that. If they're going to play here, they should pay here.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning, Mark. How are you?
Fine. I am standing in for Patty Nitz. She is on vacation this week. She asked me to attend and brief you on just two matters that we have and then answer any questions that you may have.
Okay.
First thing is that we received a records request from a Blair Koch. We believe that she is with Enviro News. She is asking for county road development, which you should have a copy of that. I highlighted. County road development replacement repair agreements as required per section. And Patty responded to Ms. Blair. Essentially, the long and short of it is we do not have a road and repair agreement in our office. We believe that any road repair agreements between any concerned companies would be done with Road and Bridge, and not through planning and zoning. To add to that fact, we have a minor discrepancy that I need to bring forward to commissioners that we might want to review. Our gas and oil drilling ordinance and Title 20, Chapter 8, Title 8, Chapter 20, where it says there shall be a requirement for a road agreement. I know that this has been brought up before to the commissioners, that I believe the statement was not necessarily singling out any one industry to be required, but it is in our language, in the code, and in the ordinance that this shall be required. The big difference that we see is the shall and may. Shall is commandment, may is an option. You might want to, I suggest to the commissioners that you may want to alter the language that may be required a road maintenance agreement rather than shall be required. That would satisfy some of the issues and questions that are being raised about a road agreement.
Have no comments.
That, I would just say it is a work in progress.
Very good.
Then what happened is that we're taking BLM oil. Yes, we're taking BLM oil without giving them anything in return. It's called sectioning out. So it says supposed to happen in all the states, but I called around, it does not happen this way. They're basically going to take it, suck it out. Most of the other states, what they do is that they put in an escrow account. There was no escrow provision at all. During the legislation, some of the senators and congressmen basically stated, well, this puts us in a litigious environment. The person that was on the floor said, well, historically, BLM doesn't sue, so we should be okay.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Erpelding, Tom Schultz again, Department of Lands. I know that Arkansas, I think their commission has adopted language to that effect. I don't think it's in the code. I think it's in their language. I do know this practice is utilized in other states, and Montana's used it routinely. Other states have large BLM holdings. Utah uses this, and the terminology is basically called a cutout. So we've talked a lot about units and things. So imagine my piece of paper is a section. We've talked about a 640-acre section. Let's say a quarter of that section, 160 acres, is the minerals that are owned by the BLM, and the BLM has chosen not to lease for whatever reason. This legislation is all it is saying is that the commission has clear authority to basically cut them out of the unit. So instead of having a section of a unit or a 640-acre unit, you would have a 480-acre unit. And it's not saying they have to do that, it's clarifying that they would have the authority to do that. Like I said, this practice is done in other states. I don't know that it's actually codified in code in other states, but the practice is something that you do see.
Okay. Any further questions there? Representative Bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Director, again. I want to better understand the situation where, when we talked about the unitization process in a previous bill, we addressed the issue, and the necessity for the 55% rule was that the oil is kind of pooled under multiple people's land, and so when someone drills a well, it's going to suck it out from the neighboring lands. So don't we have that problem here, in that when we may, as a legal matter, say that the BLM is no longer in that unit, but as a practical matter, when you drill the well, it's still going to be sucking out oil from land that the BLM owns, and will the BLM still be able to bring a protective order to stop that from happening, whether we declare them in the unit or not?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Bill, you're correct. So there is the potential, depending upon the size or the polygon, let's talk about a polygon of the reservoir. It may or may not actually extend into the entire section. We've talked about a default section of 640 acres, but that potential does exist. And we do have a case before the commission right now on this very issue. So I don't want to get into the details of that particular case, but you're right in the sense that they could be cut out of that unit. And in that process, it would allow the unit to go forward in terms of the well being drilled and those things. But it does not negate the ability of the BLM to bring some kind of protective action against the commission. But what this is clarifying is that in order to move things forward, the commission would have to cut them out. And and having to be aware of that there may be consequences if they did it. It doesn't require that they do it, it just says they could consider it.
Quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman.
Follow-up?
Yes, so I guess I'm trying to understand if this will actually accomplish the goal of enabling drilling in that area where the BLM owns rights in the minerals, or whether it will ultimately just walk us into a lawsuit. I mean, will this ultimately even be enforceable if at the end of the day the BLM still has absolute rights to say, no, you can't drill here if it's going to result in taking any of our oil?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rubel. Again, what would happen is through this process there would be a hearing and you would have information to make a decision. And there is a particular case like this before the Commission right now. But what we have seen in other states is that the BLM historically has not challenged those actions. So to the extent that they're passive and they don't challenge the cutout process, then the lack or the risk of litigation is less. If they are actively pursuing a challenge to the cutout, yes, then there is risk in doing it. And that's why the Commission would have to weigh those risks, the risks of delay in doing nothing if no leasing does occur versus the risks of potentially the BLM taking some legal action against the state if they were to cut the BLM out.
Okay, Representative Miller, your question for Director Schultz or for Representative Boyle?
No, Mr. Chairman, for a motion when it's appropriate.
Okay, Representative Erpelding? Are there other questions for Representative Boyle or Representative Schultz, or Director Schultz? Representative Erpelding?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Schultz, was the BLM, was there any discussion about this with the BLM as you bring forward this legislation, and then a follow-up after that, if possible?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Rubel, I want to clarify, this is not department legislation, this is not commission legislation, and I could not tell you for certain if the BLM was consulted. I'm not aware that they were. We were consulted in the process, but this is not department legislation.
Okay, follow up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In the event that this wasn't possible, and you were looking at a unit that had federal land on it, and the forced integration process was about to happen, would there be money that would flow basically to the agency of record that owns those rights? And is there ever reason to bypass a group and recut a unit because of lack of engagement?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Erpelding, that's a good question. So just as when we had the discussion on integration, there would be a similar effort made in this particular instance with the BLM, and I can assure you that those types of efforts have been made in the case before the Commission right now. Unfortunately or unfortunately, you cannot integrate federal minerals into a unit. So that's the problem you have, is that in essence, if the BLM chooses not to lease and they are in the unit, it stops the entire unit from having oil and gas production, unless you have something called a communitization agreement, which they would have to have a voluntary agreement where they would have some terms and conditions, which can be somewhat onerous on the industry. You actually have to put 7/8 of the cost in the escrow until such time that they do lease, which they may never actually lease. So what a cutout would in essence do is provide a workaround to the non-leasing problem that you have. So where the BLM chooses not to lease for whatever reason, they typically would have been approached, in the case for the Commission they had been approached, to lease, and they're currently working through a process to do that. And the Oil and Gas Commission has not cut out the BLM to date, but this would clarify that option would exist. But integration is not an option for federal minerals. So if this were a private landowner, you're right, they would be integrated, they would get their fair share of the royalties, but the BLM, they cannot be done.
Then what they did is they hid all production records and geological records from these wells for 1 year. So then we don't know what's going on. Then they put forced integration, where basically if 55% of the mineral rights owners in a section agree to sign a lease, they're going to force integrate the other 45%. You don't have a choice. And then if you happen to have a split estate, meaning that you own the surface rights but not the mineral rights, then what can happen is that mineral rights will trump surface rights. They can go on your property. If you do not sign the surface rights agreement on, or if you don't want them on your property, all your reviews, within 61 days, they've entered your property. and go ahead and secure their minerals. This is what happens when our legislators, our government gets in bed with big business. It's not for we the people. Who's it for? You have to follow the money. If we're not going to make money down at the CAIA County level, the money's not coming at the state level, we're not going to get paid for the roads. Who's going to be paying for this? Thank you. And right now, I'd like to introduce Kevin Miller. Come on.
Thank you. A big round of applause for Jim here. Jim and Alma and everybody here putting this together, you are beating the odds. It's very easy for a lot of folks to just say, well, we can't stop the government. They have the money. We can't stop industry. They have the influence. But you tonight are setting that standard, and you should all be very proud of yourselves. I have my friend Tea Party Bob with me from the Gem State Patriot, and I'm amazed at the activism in this state. And you are heard. Every day on the radio, I talk to folks on 580 CAIA, and we give people a voice. Well, tonight is the night where you get unfiltered, uncensored information that will arm you with what could happen to your lands here. And we're going to have a very quick, thorough presentation. We've got some folks coming in from out of state that have seen firsthand the damage being done by the process, health issues, land issues, people being ruined. It sounds like black helicopters. Maybe today black helicopters are mainstream. By the way, if anyone is here from the oil and gas industry, let us know right now. If you are, we'll ask you to give up your seats for local residents. But is anybody here from the oil and gas industry? Okay, we move on. We have index cards this evening. So when you hear something from the speakers and you have a question, we ask that you write it on an index card, and then after everybody has given their presentation, we will in fact read your questions. Lewis Meeks of Pavilion, West Virginia, Wyoming, was unable to attend due to a death in his family. So Cathy Mcmullen agreed to come here on short notice. Let me introduce our guests quickly. We have Ron Gulla, has first-hand experience with gas and oil development. In 2002, he signed a mineral rights lease with Great Lakes Energy, who later sold out to Range Resources. He was extremely optimistic when presented with the opportunities, and he was willingly and knowingly signed his lease. Within years of experience of selling drilling tools to the oil and gas industry, hey, Ron thought he knew what he was dealing with when he signed it. He trusted these folks. In 2005, Range Resources drilled the second Marcellus Shale well in Pennsylvania on Ron's farm. How many people have heard of Marcellus Shale? Pretty big deal. They drilled additional wells in 06 and 07. Ultimately, his pond, groundwater, and soil were contaminated. Ron, his wife, and 2 children no longer live on his 141-acre farm near Hickory in Washington County. He's been battling with the industry ever since he signed his mineral rights lease. Because of his experience with industry, Ron now speaks to audiences around the country about having gas wells and other industry infrastructure on his farm and how it personally impacted him and his family. Ron has spoken to landowners, legislators, PhDs from Pennsylvania to New Mexico, and we'll have Ron on in a minute. Cathy Mcmullen is a third-generation Texan. She's also a home health care nurse and a volunteer for the Denton Humane Society, and was nominated and was a finalist for the 2014 Dallas Morning News Texan of the Year. Cathy is also a founding member of a group who has been fighting for 6 years for local control in Denton, including a ban on hydraulic fracturing. They won by garnering 59% of the vote, but all of their hard work was struck down by a stroke of the governor's pen on May 18, 2015. Governor Abbott signed House Bill 40, which stops local control in its tracks. As a side note, HB 40 is very similar to Idaho's HB 464, passed in 2012. which also stripped authority from the cities and counties to have any say in what happens in their communities. And that's when I first became aware of this, because Alma would call into the radio show, and that was about the only source of information we had, was Alma letting us know what was going on. It led to a lot of great discussions. Cathy is here to share her experience as a property owner and public health professional in living and working in the oil and gas country of Texas. So we'll have her on in a minute. Right now, let's introduce our great friend, Alma Hasse, who will briefly touch on a few local issues of particular interest in relation to the topics of this forum. A big round of applause, please, for Alma.
One more time for that fine man. I don't know where our community would be without his good work and efforts. He's constantly doing things for the community, giving of himself tirelessly, and I certainly appreciate and respect him for that. I'm not going to take a lot of your time. Most of you guys have already heard from me at various points throughout the years, but I wanted to touch on a couple things that I think are really super important. We keep hearing industry spokespeople get up in meetings and say, if you sign an oil and gas lease, it's not going to have any effect on your mortgage. And I am here to tell you that that is patently false. I have right here a letter dated January 18, 2015 from PNC Mortgage, and I have copies if anybody would like one. PNC Mortgage is the lender on my farm in CAIA County. They also happen to be the 17th largest lender in the United States. They told me, I had called them and I had asked them, oil and gas is coming to Idaho, and at some point they're going to be landing at my door, and if I sign an oil and gas lease, is that okay? And they said, absolutely not. And what they did was they sent me a letter, because what they told me verbally, I knew that I would need something in writing to back it up, because industry has repeatedly, at least 3 dozen times, stated in various meetings that it does not have any impact on your mortgage. Well, here's what PNC told me, and I'll read directly from the letter. It says that they are not releasing any portion of their interest, because what you guys have to understand, when you sign an oil and gas lease, and I say this, I'm not an attorney, I would suggest you talk to an attorney and they will verify this for you, but when you sign an oil and gas lease, you're releasing a portion of the interest of your property. So if you have a mortgage on that property, you are releasing a portion of that lender's interest. That's the way it works. And I know this from 14 years in the mortgage banking business. So when they say, they basically told me that they're not giving any releases whatsoever unless I have an oil or gas lease that predates our mortgage on the property. I do not. More importantly, what they say is that please be aware that sale or transfer, which is what my signing an oil or gas lease would be, a sale or transfer of a portion of the interest of my property and PNC's property, without PNC's prior written consent is a violation of your mortgage and may result in PNC requiring immediate payment in full of all sums secured by the security instrument, meaning my Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac Uniform Deed of Trust. Failure by PNC to invoke this right is not a waiver of such right, and PNC reserves the right to invoke it at a later time. In layman's terms, what that means is that if I sign that oil and gas lease, they wanted to foreclose on me 2 months before my mortgage is paid in full, they can legally do it. It's a big deal, folks. The other thing I wanted to talk to you guys about was the other thing that we've heard continually in meetings is that, well, Idaho hasn't been impacted by this. Not only has it not happened in other areas of the country, Idaho hasn't been impacted by it either. That's also not true. We have a CAIA member here tonight who is selling a property, or wanted to sell a property. And he wanted to find out, he wanted to test if what happened with my mortgage company was true across the board. So he got a buyer on this property. She went to her lender, and he told her that he wanted to retain his mineral rights. Well, her bank said, no way. The mineral rights don't come with the property, we're not going to give a loan. So she wasn't able to get a loan to buy that property. So that's happened here in Idaho. Also, you guys, most of you guys should receive the packet when you came in. In there it talks about two people here in Emmett who have problems attaining, getting a refinance of their property and obtaining a business loan on their property because of existing oil and gas leases that were actually bundled up and used as security, which is something that the industry does all the time, sells them down the road and utilizes that to obtain funds to continue their operations. So that's already happened. It happens all the time across the country, and it's already happened here in Emmett. By the way, that article, that dates back to 2011. So it's happened 3 years ago and continues to happen. The other thing too, two other things, and I want to let you guys go. A Piatt County couple signed what they thought, what they were told, what they were shown was a seismic lease, an agreement to allow seismic testing only on their property. Well, this lady was really sick. Her brother-in-law was on the verge of dying. Long story short, when she got the recorded document back, it was not a seismic lease agreement, it was an oil and gas lease. Somehow the papers got changed. And she was very upset about it. In fact, just 2 days ago, called the company and said, you better fix this or I'm going to the media. I hope she does go to the media because I suspect that's not an isolated incident. So if you think that you signed a seismic lease, double check that paper. Make sure it doesn't say oil and gas lease on it. Last thing was, we've also been told, actually several incidents of leases that were recorded as notarized, even though the owners, the mineral rights owners, did not sign it in front of the notary. Well, as I understand it, that's not legal. So check those documents. If you guys are in front of a notary signing it, it might not be a valid instrument. So, and on that note, I'm going to turn it back over to Mr. Miller. I appreciate your time and I appreciate you guys coming out. Thank you.
Okay, a big round of applause. Okay, now, everybody awake? Okay. A big round of applause now for Ron Gulla.
Thank you. There's one thing that Jim mentioned here. Folks, please stick together and talk to each other. Don't let this damn industry divide you, because that's what they do. They divide and they conquer. They don't want you to talk to each other. And you're so darn fortunate to have someone like Alma and other people involved here to try to bring people in here that have been affected by this, because this is what the industry does not want. They suppress so much information, it's unbelievable. The news media, it's so sickening what's happened in Pennsylvania. It's incredible. Again, stick together and talk about anything and everything. Who approaches you, landmen, because when their lips are moving, they're lying. They totally misrepresented the lease to me. 100%. The individual that came into our area, first of all, they go to the Farm Bureau. They get someone from the Farm Bureau because the farmers are going to trust someone from the Farm Bureau. Right? The guy comes in, says, look, we're going to form like a co-op. We're going to try to get the best price for your leases, blah, 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 blah. I asked the man, well, how much money are you getting out of this? I'm not getting anything. Well, he was a liar. Anyway, they told us in the lease, and also, let me go back, the individual that also approached us, but he went to the Farm Bureau first and had that individual come out and approach the landowners, the farmers. Because, again, you're going to trust someone from the Farm Bureau. Then the individual behind it was from Harrisburg, who works for the Pennsylvania Game Commission. He was a Penn State graduate. Penn State was a cheerleader, is a cheerleader for the oil and gas industry. Follow the money. They've made well over probably $200 million in donations. And they're a land-grant school, so naturally they're going to tout how great this is. Well, the individual that bundled all these leases, who worked for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, don't you think this is a little bit of a conflict of interest? He works for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, and he's out there selling leases. Well, they challenged it, and they didn't do anything to him. Because it's the politics. Now, he also leases the game lands. Well, you call him, he was your man to go to. If you have any problems, you call him. We had problems. We called him. He never returned phone calls to a lot of people. He returned my phone call. He ended up coming to my house unannounced. Now, why would you come to my house unannounced if I had problems? A little suspicious, don't you think? All I got from him was lip service. They drilled 4 wells on my farm. From day one, it was total hell. I fought with them constantly. They put a road, a location road, where I told them not to put it. They put it exactly where they wanted to put it. I happened to be the second horizontal well drilled. They were supposed to be doing vertical wells. Again, in our lease, we were supposed to get 350,000 cubic feet of gas free a year. That was the bait. That was the hook. To hook everybody. They did not tell us they were doing horizontal drilling. They did not tell us they were going for the Marcellus Shale, which was a wet gas, which you cannot burn in your house. Because what's in the wet gas is propane, butane, hexane, ethane. They sell it. This is the cream that they're after. You got paid for drip gas, which was in oil, and you get paid for the methane. That's it. There was a lawsuit against Range Resources, and they settled out of court for $28,750,000, I think it was. There were like 2,000 plaintiffs. Because what they were doing with this wet gas, they had what they call post-production costs. Post-production costs, they were charging you, the landowner, to dry it, to store it, and to market it. So, say for example, you got 14% royalty. Well, your royalty check just dropped to 7%. Now, up in Central PA, there are lawsuits up there that farmers were paying the back charge 90 to 95%. We have lawsuits stacked up in Pennsylvania like cordwood against Range, Williams, Mark West, EQT, Rice Energy, Consol. There are a number of lawsuits out there now. I think Chesapeake too, but there's just so many. And there are a lot of nuisance lawsuits. And this you'll love this part. One of the companies, EQT, offered the landowners $50,000 apiece for the landowners not to sue them for nuisance. It just came out, email came out last week, Range was offering people $500. So some of the people did sign these contracts, and when you sign that contract, you just signed your life away. Because whatever happens there, you really can't go after them. But it's safe, they're going to be a great neighbor, this is all wonderful. But they want you to sign off so you don't sue them for nuisance. Now, and you can look all this up. This stuff is all over the internet. And there is a website that everyone needs to check out. It's Marcellus-shale.us. There is more information on there, and you'll see what's been happening in Pennsylvania, West Virginia, well, some in West Virginia, because he's been up in a plane numerous times taking pictures. So, and do not believe that people have not been affected health-wise. The industry always wants to say it's anecdotal. They love using that word, anecdotal. I have had more people contact me, people that have lost cattle. There's a book out there that Marcellus Protest of Pittsburgh put together, Shell-Filled Stories. This book is outdated now. There is a new one, as I speak, being put to print, which will have a lot more people in it. And this is what's been happening around Pennsylvania. There's also another website that you can check out. It's called the List of the Harmed. List of the Harmed. These are people that have been harmed from oil and gas. Jenny Lissack, who I've worked with for several years, started putting this together. The list now is over 16,000 people. And a lot of these people, when you go to court, you're gagged. If you do get a settlement, if there is a settlement, you're gagged. Well, if it's all so safe and everything's so wonderful, why they gag you? You can't talk to anybody about it. And here's something else. I don't know how familiar you folks are about the Halliburton loophole. They started drilling in our area. They did the very first test well in 2004. 2005, the Halliburton loophole was put through. And Cheney pressured the federal EPA to put the exemptions through. They're exempt from clean air, clean water, safe drinking water, the right to know, the Superfund Act. Superfund Act is hazardous cleanup. Why would you sign a lease if they're exempt? The liability is left upon you, the lessor, the landowner, and the community. They don't handle the liability. There's a reason for this. Because they know there are liabilities involved, that's why they got all this in place. It gets better. When I worked in the oil and gas industry, in 1985, I think it was, there were 4 deep wells going down in Pennsylvania in the Appalachian Basin. Wouldn't you know, I worked on 3 out of the 4. It was all tight hole information. I didn't know what they were doing. I knew it was experimental. I knew they had their geologists there on site. They had their trailer there. They were taking samples of the cuttings constantly. Some of the rigs were triples, which are deep capacity rigs, which Pennsylvania never really used triples. They'd use doubles, and they'd use hydraulic pull downs. So these gentlemen, this industry, like all industries, they're always 20, 25 years ahead of time, ahead of schedule. They know what they're after. And there's no question what they were doing back then is what's happening now in the last 10 years in Pennsylvania, because they've drilled excessively, in those areas. Something else I want you to know, Alma touched on it as far as the mortgages. I went to my bank in April of 2009, and I banked with this particular bank 4 years. It was Washington Financial. I wanted to get a loan to support my lawsuit against Range. My farm was paid for. I have excellent credit because I'm a workaholic. Well, the banker told me, Ron, I've been in the business for 30 years. I'm said, I've driven through Washington County and Greene County. I've seen the roads. I've seen the location roads. I've seen the well sites. I've seen the green condensate tanks. He said, this is all new to the banking industry. We don't know how it's going to work. Now you got to remember, this is April 09. Ron, I'm going to compare this to the Obama stimulus package. It's all new. We don't know how it's going to work. Ron, we cannot put a value on the number of gas wells that are on your property. Because it's a commodity. It goes up and down with the market. You can't put a value to it. Next, he said, Ron, we would have to appraise your property. And your property could be worth $500,000. He said, now, after it's been drilled, your property could only be worth $200,000. In closing, we don't want it. This is your largest investment in your life. This is what you have to realize. And when they come into your area, they industrialize your area. Take a lot of pictures, get a lot of water samples, monitor your air. Many things have to be done because this is a transition that takes place that's not pretty. And there's plenty of this information out there. You can look at the Jonah field. Look at any of the major fields that have been developed. Pennsylvania, there's a professor that I work with, and he has a great PowerPoint presentation, which I wish I would have had. He shows Mount Pleasant Township, where my farm was, before they drilled. And then he shows it current. And then all the dots come up. All the wells. All of the compressor stations. Cryogenics plant. All the infrastructure that comes with it. It's the biggest spider web you've ever seen. And people will tell you, I've had many people tell me, nothing's the same. I drive around and try to remember what my farm looked like. I've had farmers tell me that. And then the industry will criticize me and say, well, Mr. Gulla's out there and he badmouths the industry and he uses scare tactics. No, I don't. I've told the industry many times, get in my vehicle, let's take a ride, I'll introduce you to the farmers, that their water wells are contaminated, they've lost livestock, they have health issues. Their water was fine before you came into the area. Because your fracking was super high pressures that you never fracked with before. Their frac valves were rated at 20,000 psi. You know what 20,000 psi is capable of doing? That's a bomb. You have no idea what that would do to you. There's literally nothing left. And I wish somebody would do a simulation of that. I sold heavy equipment all my life, and I've been around equipment. And I was let go last year, at the end of this month would be a year, that I was let go because I wasn't producing, and they made up all these pocketbook stories, and I was also told to stop talking about fracking to any of the employees. And I was there going on, it would have been my 20th year. And it was a John Deere dealer. I sold construction and forestry and construction equipment. This is what happens. Because they infiltrate everywhere. And if you stand up and you talk about something that affected you and you don't go along with it, they're going to make your life miserable. That's how it works. It's always worked that way. For everybody. It's nothing new. There's another thing that I want you all to realize. Think about in 2000 when the market crashed. What did he tell us? Put your money in 401k. Put your money in stock. Oh, that's the place to put your money. Then we all got burned. We dumped our money in 401ks. Yeah, we're putting our money there. Then, next thing you know, everything started to tank because they had everything overvalued. It was a game with Wall Street. It's the same players on Wall Street that did what they did to us with the stock market. Because then, a few years after that kind of leveled out, then what did we do? Or what did they say? Stick your money in land. Land, real estate, that's where to put it. You can touch it, you can hold it, you can smell it. Then they deregulated banking. You have Fannie Mac, Fannie Mae, everything that went along with the real estate business. Then what happened with the real estate business? How many people got burned? For several years, I saw a lot of guys, all my contractors, they lost a lot of their equipment. They couldn't make payments. A lot of stuff got repoed. Now, a few years go by. What's going next? What's coming up next? Oil and gas. And by God, we're going to be independent, right? No, we're not. This is all about export. This is always, it always has been about export. It's always been about export. We've got oil and we've got fuel right now. The supply yards are full. The storage fields are full. Why is our gasoline going back up again? Why?
$60 a barrel to make any money.
Yeah. And you've got OPEC, you've got all these other countries pouring oil out there.
Put it in refineries in China and send it back 50 times the ocean.
Yeah.
They won't
Well, they control, they've always controlled. They're the biggest game in town. So, what has to happen here, and it is happening, a lot of people now that have been affected by the oil and gas industry are standing up and they're fighting back. And there are lawsuits, like I said, stacking up everywhere. There's a lot of major companies now, and brokerage firms, employee, like 401ks, a number of companies that will put your money out, there for your retirement plans. One large company in Norway, just I think last week, they just divested from oil and gas and coal. It's over $900 billion. So, and it is happening all around the world now. I've been interviewed by over 20 foreign countries. And when I owned my farm, I no longer own it. Range did pay me. And what they did, they pulled the bait and switch on me. They baited me with another farm. The other farm was leased. I told the realtor to do a title search because Range wanted me to use this realtor. I got paid for my farm $1.5 million. My farm was worth $1 million. Long before they ever came. They got the mineral rights with it. I had to pay capital gains, over $130,000. I had to sell all my heavy equipment. I paid capital gains. If I had to start all over again to have what I had, I'd need $2 million. 2 days before Christmas, I got the registered letter in the mail. I have to appear in court. Appear in court. I would not sign at the closing. The judge asked me 5 times to sign, for the closing. I said, I'm not signing it. Judge, I said, I've been lied to. I said, you have no idea what I've been put through. You just have absolutely no idea. He said, well, there's nothing we can do. They sent it down to the Prothonotari's office. The Prothonotary signed off on the sales agreement. Range has my farm. You know why? Because they contaminated my damn farm. We filed a right to know a year and a half ago. I went to the DEP's office and asked the Department of Environmental Protection, and we also call them don't expect protection. Because guess what they were doing? They came up with a sweet code 942. They tested your water. 942 would go through their computer when they test your water. They were not giving you all of the analysis because they're working with the industry. The regulatory agencies are working with the industries. It's happening everywhere. That's how it works. The one guy that I worked with on my farm, when my 3-acre pond turned black, can you put that back up? He said, well, I don't know what happened. I said, wait a minute. He says, well, cabs right above the pond. I said, I've been fighting with you guys from day one, practically. Well, I was fighting it from day one. That is fact. And anyway, he said, your farm has been a textbook case of what not to do. And he said to me, oh, we don't know. I said, there's nothing going on here. We don't know where it's coming from. Okay, you don't know where it's coming from. Interesting. This was my house. This was the first well they drilled, which is vertical. That was number 3. That was the second horizontal well drilled in Pennsylvania. That was the second test well. And they never told anybody that they were doing horizontal drilling. I figured it out because of my background. And then I also caught some information that I received from the DEP on a permit. And then I started to spread the word, they're doing horizontal drilling. Then number 6 is a vertical, and then number 9 is a horizontal. Well, here's the location roads that they put onto my property. Now, I've cleared all this property. I cleared close to 80 acres on this property, and I wasn't done. Anyway, this location road, all the water is coming down off of the well, right down into the pond. There was silt back there over a foot thick. My fish were dying. They didn't all die. There were still fish in there alive. There was no way in hell I was going to eat them. Not now. And then the DEP says, well, what kind of fish are dying? Was it one specific breed? My fish are dying. What don't you understand here? So, also he told me, again, my farm was a textbook case of what not to do. He said, there's an album of photographs at the DEP's office in Pittsburgh this day. I did a file review. Got down there. A friend of mine who took that picture. That's the Marcellus-shale.us website. I see 4 manila folders sitting there. Okay. So where's the album full of photographs? There aren't any photographs. I said, well, so-and-so said there's an album full of photographs, and that was a gentleman who used to work for them. Well, he doesn't work here any longer. I said, I know where he works. He went to work for Emmett Resources. So, anyway, we filed this right to know about a year and a half ago, I'd say maybe 2 years. And we got some pictures that they had, but I didn't get all the good ones. They either put them in file 13, they either destroyed them, or what have you. Because they've been juggling a lot of files. And a lot of people have had this problem all over Pennsylvania. And there are major lawsuits there, and I work with, I try to help some of these attorneys out as much as I can. And I did a lot of investigations as far as people that have been 942 in almost every family. Well, every family that I knew, when they had their water tested, they were 942. Because supposedly what the deal was with the 942, the EPA, the federal EPA wanted the state, which is the DEP agency, to test for 24 heavy metals. And here what they would do, they would only give you 6, the DEP would only give you 6 or 8. They weren't giving you the whole test. People's water was brown, had water that was brown. It stunk, it was black. It was gray. I've been to these houses. I drank their water. It was fine. They never had any problems or issues. You know what the industry says? It's naturally occurring. It's not naturally occurring. They caused it. Something else? Get on your computer and type in Bush Paraguay Aquifer. Check out what the Bush family bought maybe 8 years ago. 100,000 acres in Paraguay, one of the world's finest water aquifers, liquid gold. You think these boys don't have an agenda? You think Washington, D.C., we don't have politicians that are working for us. Again, follow the money. These boys are shields for the industry. That's what's happening. And they're getting everything pushed through, and they're jamming it down our throat, and we are losing our civil rights. Again, take a look around. Look at how all businesses changed. Look how all the stores have changed. Look how the Kmart's, a lot of stores out of business. Look at the car dealerships. You've got mega car dealerships now. In the equipment business, the Cat dealerships, the John Deere dealerships, they're huge dealers now. They don't want it small anymore. I got to wrap this up. Folks, I could go on and on. There's so much here I didn't even show you. But just so that you know, real quick, we tested the water. We had gas migration also on my property because my neighbor's water wells, they had methane in it. Yet again, the industry says it's naturally occurring. Yeah, it does naturally occur. But not when you come home and you put your spigot on and you hear like somebody has an air hose from a compressor attached to it. Okay, because your well is purged now. Because they're connecting the layers with all of this pressure that they're using when they frack. And they release the pressure. Well, anyway, we tested the water on one particular well. Outside the casing was bubbling, so we had gas, the casing filled, the cement job filled. This was above my pond. And this test was not through the DEP. We had benzene, 71.0. We had ethylbenzene, 24.1. We had hexane, 1.61. We had MP xylenes, 225. We had O-xylene, 73.8. We had toluene, 208. These are all carcinogens. So if it's coming up around the casing and coming up on top, where do you think it's at? It's in your water aquifer. We also had I had another neighbor who, he had his well, an old well that was drilled 1901, and it was buried with dirt. And when they drilled the crack about 3/4 of a mile from him, it turned into an artesian well. The dirt blew off of it. Water came bubbling up because that's what happens too. You get these older wells, they become conduits. They'll connect, some of them. Not all of them, but some of them. Because you already have these wells drilled, and they fracked some of these wells years ago. Because they'll say, we've been fracking for 65 years. Yeah, you have. We've not had not one water well contaminated. You damn liar. You've had over thousands. Because you're not reporting it. In Pennsylvania, reported last year, 243 wells were contaminated. In Pennsylvania. They had far more than that. Because a lot of the people that I know, they never recorded it. The DEP didn't report it. Now, this is something for well bore integrity. And this was done, and this is from the Pennsylvania DEP. Primary results of survey of leaking wells in Pennsylvania Marcellus Plain based on violations issued by the DEP. Okay, well bore integrity. Recent operation performance in Pennsylvania. They drilled 1,609 wells drilled in 2010. 97 well failures, 6% rate of failure. 1,972 wells drilled in 2011, 140 well failures, 7.1% rate of failure. 1,346 wells drilled in 2012, 120 well failures, 8.9% rate of failure. So, and here's something else, and I don't want to keep wrapping up the time. Here's something else you need to know. There's what they call a 10K, and this is what the industry has to file. The 10K, this is filed, basically this information is given to shareholders and stockholders. They don't give it to the landowner. Natural gas and oil drilling producing operations can be hazardous and may expose us to liabilities, including environmental liabilities. Natural gas and oil operations are subject to many risks, including well blowouts, cratering, and explosions, pipe failures, fires, formations with abnormal pressures, uncontrollable flows of natural gas, oil, brine, or well fluids, and other environmental hazards and risks. Other drilling operations involve risks from high pressure and from mechanical difficulties such as stuck pipes, collapsed casings, and separated cables. Some of these risks or hazards could materially and adversely affect our revenues and expenses by reducing or shutting in production, from wells or otherwise negatively impacting the projected economic performance of our prospects. If any of these risks occur, we could sustain substantial losses as a result of injury or loss of life, severe damage to or destruction of property, natural resources, or equipment, pollution or other environmental damage, cleanup responsibilities, regulatory investigations, and administrative, civil, and criminal penalties, and injunctions resulting in limit or suspension of operations. This is what they file with the share that they give to the shareholders and the stockholders. Now this gal here, she's from Butler County. Her house, she built a house brand new. It was a double wide. It was a manufactured home. Anyway, it was appraised at $110,000. She lost her water. It turned black. She had a water buffalo for a short time, as well as a number of her other neighbors. And then the company said, we didn't do it, blah, 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 blah. Then they took the water buffaloes. Well, this gal had health issues. She had high levels of arsenic. Her hair was falling out. Her fingernails were starting to curl up. She had the rashes. And when she put on her water, she had the water pressure was very, very limited. And the water would turn black. And it stunk some years. Well, anyway, the house was appraised at $110,000. She listed it for $120,000. She had it for sale, I think, for a little over a year, right in that range. And then they gave up. So they foreclosed on it. And then her husband, they're a young couple. And her husband ended up using his pension money to find another house. So they moved away. And now the company's over in that area now. And they're fighting over there now. She's really disgusted. But anyhow, the bank put it up for sale once they foreclosed on it the first time for $87,900. And again, it was appraised. It was appraised at $110,000. And they put it on the market for $120,000. So the bank listed it for $87,900, and they listed it for $29,900, and they sold it for $17,500. They're not a good neighbor. Thanks for listening to me.
Okay, thank you, Ron. If you have a question, please write them down on the index cards, and we'll be by to the center of the aisle. If you pass them to the center, we'll pick them up with a basket. Okay, our next guest is Mark Waterman, a 20-year resident of Eagle. Very thorough, well-researched young man. I speak to him quite a bit every day. He's here to talk about earthquakes and fracking and the relationship between the two. Big round of applause for Mark.
My name is Mark Waterman. I'm 58 years old. I've resided in Eagle, Idaho for almost 20 years. I'm not an activist and have no political affiliation with any party. I have since my youth been fascinated with Earth, space, and space sciences. Before moving here to Idaho, I was involved with the Earthquake Prediction Group with SRI International, or Stanford Research Institute. A good friend of mine, which I learned much from, Jim Berkland, was a senior geologist from Santa Clara County, now retired. And I wish to make this clear up front to everybody in the audience that I have no degrees in geoscience whatsoever, but I do have a reasonable understanding of the geodynamics of how earthquakes can happen and why. Idaho is earthquake country, and we were ranked number 6 out of 50 states for seismic activity. We have now been pushed down that ladder to number 7, largely due to the fact that a state named Oklahoma has now become, in the last 5 to 7 years, number 2, ahead of places like California, of all places, where I once lived. So that's Alaska being number 1. Due in large part to, again, the fracking industry. States like Kansas, Texas, Ohio, and others are now seeing when pressurized injection of wastewater and chemicals are induced into once dormant or inactive fault zones that have existed hundreds of thousands or millions of years. They are now being reactivated and coming back to life with very negative consequences. Look at the pictures of damage done to homes in Oklahoma alone. No one is being held responsible for any of the damages caused by the fracking industry. Is it possible this could happen in Idaho with known active and inactive faults at this time, and uncharted fault systems yet to be found due to lack of funding? On May 13, 1916, an estimated 5.5 to 6.0 earthquake hit the Emmett, Jim County area and was felt as far as eastern Oregon to southwest Montana. You can find this on the U.S. Geological Survey's website. You can also find it on Idaho Geological Survey's website and look at their records of historic earthquakes in the state of Idaho. Also one was felt back in 1947 in the Boise area that shook people up pretty well back then. I've talked to Rocky Barker, the environmental reporter at the Idaho Statesman, and a few other state officials that stated, geologically speaking, we don't have the same type of geology as Oklahoma, Texas, Kansas, etc. And the type of drilling that would be performed here in Idaho would not be the same as the fracking they do in other states. I don't know about you in the audience, but watching the way our federal, state governments operate, large corporations, lobbyists, and behind-the-scenes dealings that seem to be quite the norm these days, I personally do not feel that even our state officials have properly issued safeguards in place once the drilling starts, and in the event of a fallout, of possible damaging earthquakes to follow, that in this region, which I don't know how many people know, we live in what was once the Snake River Basin, and that our ground around here is not very stable. Much like what happened during the Loma Prieta earthquake, which I felt when I lived in the Bay Area prior to moving here, it did a lot of damage to landfill areas and areas of soft ground, gravel, which you find along the rivers. So the ground around here is not, substructure is not sound enough to withstand medium to large quakes in the Treasure Valley without causing widespread damage. And who will, if quakes do occur, how many of you have earthquake insurance? Will our state officials take responsibility? If they're still in office, that is. Will these big oil and gas companies pay for any of the fallout as a result of earthquakes that might ensue? I think not. Oklahoma residents that have suffered extensive damage to their homes, and you again can find this on the USGS website, and see the pictures by Googling earthquakes, fracking, Oklahoma, and it's a great government website to look for that. They have not received, to my knowledge, any just compensation for their miseries. And again, what of Idaho citizens? We must be assured that if any seismic activity occurs from pressurized drilling, fracking, or whatever they want to call it, that it's stopped immediately. Now, I want to just bring up one fact that way back in, let me get out some more of my cheat sheets here. Drilling has taken place, obviously, for the oil and gas industry since, for the last 65 years. I don't know how many people have ever heard of the Rocky Mountain Waste Arsenal in Colorado. Back in 1961, the U.S. Army in Colorado, the eastern side of the Denver metropolitan area, decided to drill a deep well to inject basically waste products from war, basically biochemical, mustard gas, etc. Within 32 minutes of injecting this down at 4 a.m., April 24, 1961, a small earthquake was reported. By the end of 1962, 190 quakes were reported, and by the end of 1963, over 1,300 earthquakes were recorded at or around the eastern Denver metropolitan area. In 1965, 3 quakes in a swarm basically did damage equivalent to about a 4.5 to 5 point earthquake around the city of Commerce in Commerce City, Colorado. In 1966 and 67, strong earthquakes were felt, including one felt over 15,000 square miles away as far away as Laramie, Wyoming, and Goodland, Kansas. So that's quite an area to cover. By the way, Colorado is not well known as being a seismically active state. Okay. In September of 1968, the Army began removing fluid from the arsenal well at a very slow rate. Many shocks occurred during this period. Since that time, earthquake activity has slowly subsided as a result of their stopping of the pumping of this wastewater into the ground. And to this day, basically, you don't find earthquakes going on in the region if you go to the USGS website, which I go on 2, 3, 4 times a day. But you can find plenty of information, again, at the USGS website. Another one is the website that I found just absolutely fantastic. It's called The Watchers. And it will cover everything on Earth and space science, and everything from climate change to earthquake, volcanic activity, geomagnetic storms, everything. And they have a little tab up in the right corner on the front page. If you go in there and Google fracking, you'll see a lot about what Ron was just talking about, earthquakes that are caused by it, the groundwater, wastewater, the things that are what's contaminating our wells. So that's all I pretty much have to say.
Good job. Oh no, great job. All right, and remember, if you have any questions, just write them on the index cards and we'll pick them up in the basket there. Our next guest is from Texas. She's coming up here right now. Certainly we appreciate her coming here, and also Ron as well. Big round of applause for Cathy Mcmullen.
Speaking makes me very nervous, so you'll have to bear with me. That's why this is so important that it has to be said. I'm a third-generation Texan. I knew nothing about a split estate. I've been researching Idaho, and I find that we have a lot in common. A lot in common as far as split estate, the state regulatory agencies, the state politicians, and the energy production companies that are coming in here. Really, the only difference I see in the energy production companies are the names. So in 2004, my husband and I decided that we were going to retire to a rural area right outside of Dallas. We purchased 11 acres, and this was going to be our retirement home. We rescued animals, we raised miniature donkeys, and for the first couple of years it was great. Our first sign of trouble came one afternoon when we were sitting on the front porch, and we saw 2 men climbing over our fence with some equipment. So being the good Texans that we are, we turned our big dogs loose, we got our shotgun, and we walked down there and asked them what they were doing. They told us that they were there to conduct seismic testing and that we could not make them leave our property. And my husband said, "You have about 10 seconds to get back over the fence," which they did. They came back, they brought the sheriff's department, and the sheriff's department said, "You have to let them on your property." That was about the beginning of the end for us. I came home about 2 months later. We lived on, it was from the main road, our house was 3.1 miles in on a dirt road. I came home one afternoon from work, and over a mile of gravel trucks and water trucks were lined up on that dirt road, and they were going into the property right below us. I knew nothing about what was going on. This was the very beginning of the Barnett Shale boom. We were told that they were going to be putting in a natural gas well, several of them, and there was nothing we could do about it. We thought, well, we're just going to have to live with this. We were told it's only going to be a couple of months. It won't infect your life at all. I can tell you the truck traffic, the disrespecting of our property with trash, the noise, the odors, the headaches, the constant insomnia, the lights. It was a heavy industrial use that was at our property, and we could not stop it. But we thought we could live through it. So this company, needing water, ran a big hose into one of the conservation tanks right below our property, and they sucked all the water out of that in about 2 days. In the middle of the night, we heard some cattle making some terrible noises. We just figured they were calving. We got up in the morning, and 2 of these cows had gone into the tank to drink, and the mud was so soft that they sank up to their chest, and they had to be put down because they had hypothermia. Within the next 2 or 3 weeks, the black hose came back, the tanks filled back up with water, In the morning, we woke up after hearing several cattle in distress that night, and there were 3 dead cows on the hill. They brought a veterinarian out, and the veterinarian said that they died of flash pulmonary edema. Now, I don't know why 3 perfectly heifered cows would die of this, and no one could really figure it out. My only conclusion was that they drank out of this tank. And when you start researching the chemicals that you see that they use in hydraulic fracturing or in well stimulation, you'll see that antifreeze is one of them, to keep the drill bit from getting too hot. And one of the signs of ingesting that is flash pulmonary edema. My husband, we could not run the risk of our animals being exposed to this, so we decided that we would move. We found homes for all of our little miniature donkeys, and we took our rescue dogs, and we moved into town. Because we were told by the state, in the country you have no one to help you. They can do anything that they want out there. You're not within a city limit. So we decided we would move into Denton, Texas, and we found a great little 100-year-old farmhouse on an acre inside the city, and this was going to be our retirement home. We'd been in that home about 2 weeks, and I was walking the dogs to the park by my house, and I noticed 5 T-posts in the ground with pink flags on them. That is what they do when they're marking a borehole for a well site. I found out that Range Resources, which has since sold out, had intentions of drilling 5 wells there, 300 feet from a park, 200 feet from homes, on a barren spot of 200 acres of land. We went to the city, we fought, we tried to get them to move that just further away from the park, move it to the other side of the 200 acres. Just think about the park. And they told us they didn't have to, and they weren't going to. So they proceeded to drill 5 wells. That was 18 months, and it was awful. We tested for air emissions. My little neighborhood, we're not a rich neighborhood. We gathered up $3,700. We did our own air testing because the city and the state wouldn't. We found that even before drilling, there was nothing in the air. Then during fracturing and flaring, which they flared this gas well, the benzene levels in that was 6 times over the short-term established limits. There was still nothing that we could do. The city told us we don't have the ordinances, we can't fight back, the state wouldn't help us. Okay, that was our fate. We resigned ourselves to that. We decided within the next 3 or 4 years we were going to get a set of ordinances in our city that was more protective. We fought against the industry. We tried to work with them, give us some setbacks, give us some protections, test our water. They refused on every count. In 2014, January, we passed a really okay set of ordinances. It wasn't the best, but it was good. We figured that that was what we were going to have to live with, and we could. We had a 1,200-foot setback. That year in June, I got a frantic call from a mother. They're drilling a well 180 feet from my child's bedroom. My child has cerebral palsy. He's 3 years old. He's mentally challenged. He lives in this home 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. This is where we are. How could they possibly drill a well 180 feet from a neighborhood? When we asked them, because we can. And the state of Texas allowed that. We fought and we fought and we fought, and we could not make them stop. One day we were out there canvassing the neighborhood, and a school bus pulled up, and what they had done was they had drilled a well. They had drilled wells on 180 feet on one side of the neighborhood, and then they drilled a series of wells on the 200 feet on the other side. So this neighborhood was sandwiched in between, and they were drilling and fracturing these wells. We watched the kids get off the school bus, and they ran for cover. Their parents were out there making sure no one lingered at the bus stop, because the air was so bad. We all looked at each other and we said, it is time to ban hydraulic fracturing in Denton, Texas. We got a really good lawyer. We developed an ordinance that would withstand all legal challenge. We got the signatures and we placed it on the ballot. We fought from May until November. We went door to door. We educated neighbors. The industry spent $1.1 million on that campaign, which less than 1% of that came from Denton residents. We spent $75,000 on that campaign, which over 90% of those funds came from Denton residents, and we won. It shook the industry to its core. It made the state of Texas pay up and listen to us, look at us. That's all we've been asking is for help. So we put the ban in place. The companies that were there could not do any hydraulic fracturing, everyone looked over the ordinance and realized that this was going to make its way through the court system to the Texas Supreme Court, and we were going to win, our ban was going to hold. So, when industry realized they weren't going to be able to come in and overturn our ban, they went to our state capitol. And they corrupted every single legislator in there. They gave them huge campaign contributions. I went to a stakeholders meeting where there were probably 28 lobbyists and me, and those lobbyists knew the representatives' first names, they knew their wives' names, they knew where their kids went to college, they knew where they got their haircuts, they knew where their vacation homes were. I'm sitting in the back of the room thinking these politicians, these lobbyists have unprecedented access to the politicians I elected. And I realized at that time it was over. I went to Austin. We brought busloads of people to Austin. We spoke passionately about please don't enact this bill to overturn our ban and take away our right to local control. A bill passed that overturned our ban. We can no longer have setbacks that an industry deems as commercially reasonable. We can no longer keep an operator from coming into our communities if the state considers them to be prudent and reasonable. We lost. It was devastating. So now our city is looking at having to repeal our ban. As a matter of fact, there's a meeting tonight. We are told that our only recourse is to repeal the ban. If we don't, industry is going to make Denton give a public apology because we were wrong. They are going to make us promise to never sue the industry. They are going to decrease our setbacks. They are going to basically rub salt in the wound. Instead of just saying graciously, we won, we will be good neighbors, they are now using us to hammer home to every city in Texas, don't you dare cross the industry. We're crossing the industry. We're not giving up. My mission now is to go to every city in Texas and make sure that every politician who voted for House Bill 40 does not get reelected. We're going to put politicians in the Capitol, we're going to repeal House Bill 40, and we're going to reenact their ban. I'm just telling you this, you feel helpless and you can't fight. As a community, we fought. As a state, we're going to fight. You don't give up all rights when these people come in. You do not. So I'm very proud of y'all for fighting. I'm proud to stand here before you. I'm still nervous about speaking, but just congratulations all of you for standing up.
Okay, if you have any questions, now's the time to pass them around. If we have any more, we'll ask them around. The question, if my water is contaminated, how can it be fixed?
It can't. I did not say what we just released a couple weeks ago. Well, I didn't say what we just, actually what, a week and a half ago or so. We just released some information. This was the DEP's information about radiation that is in 2 different streams in Greene County. Radium-224, 226. I think there's 228. There's alpha, there's beta. Extremely high. It's extremely high. The one stream, Pennsylvania Fish Commission stocks. And people are going to eat these fish. The DEP knew about this radiation because in the organization that released this information that I sent to Alma was the Isaac Walton League. And they're 50,000 strong, they're nationwide. And when they released this information, actually what they did is they filed a right to know with the DEP and they came up with this information. And the DEP knew this back in 2014 and they never released it to the public. So, and with the radiation, the half-life of some of this stuff is 1,650 years. So, and once your water well is contaminated, Majority of the people in Pennsylvania, there are places up there now, I mean, they rely on buying water. There's no other way. They have to buy water because industry says we didn't do it, and it was naturally occurring. They retain the largest law firms in town when they come to town.
It can't be fixed. When we moved out to the little farm, the people next to us, that the industry moved in, took 3 of their 5 acres and drilled their site. Their house was originally valued at $340,000. Within 3 years, it was on the appraisal roll for $87,000 because there was no water. The water was contaminated. So, and then industry had these people sign a non-disclosure clause so they could say there's no known contamination. So if they could have fixed it, they would have fixed it. They can't fix it.
Okay, next question. Is there any way to get out of the contract? I've heard that some sent a check back with the contract. You don't know on this one? Okay.
That's usually the hardest thing to do once you sign that lease. I know I'm not real versed at this question, but I know some people that have approached it, and it was very hard to get out of it. But just so that you do know, there are lawsuits, as I mentioned early on, in Pennsylvania. They are suing the landman and the company that misrepresented the lease. They are also suing some, say for example, your neighbor didn't sign a lease, or you didn't sign a lease and your neighbor signed a lease, and they drilled there, and they contaminated your property or your water. There's a lawsuit right now that's filed. It was filed back in November of last year, and the story came out in November. They're suing the landowner that signed the lease. They're going after them. That's what's happening now. And the lawyers are coming out of the woodwork now also. There's advertisements on TV. If you've been affected by oil and gas, call so-and-so. There are billboards on it. Big billboards. Benzene exposure. These are the workers. And of course, landowners too, that they're targeting the workers. And this is a very large law firm. I can't think of the name, Goldman, Presley, and White, or something like that. And they've done a number of the mesothelioma cases with asbestos. Because asbestos was safe too, wasn't it? You're going to see the same thing with the lawsuits on TV. I don't know if you see them here about asbestos exposure as you do with the fracking. It's already started.
Okay, I thought there were studies that show drilling and even fracking is safe.
We have a website in Denton, and we put up a lot of peer-reviewed studies. I would suggest if you're going to get any information from a study, that you make sure that it's peer-reviewed. Because industry will come in and they will fund a lot of these studies, and the studies are then slanted towards industry. A peer-reviewed study is an unbiased, it is reviewed by other scientists or other researchers, and that is where you need to get your information, not by an industry-funded scientific study.
She couldn't have said it any better, because you will get this information, and you'll see it out there that this is completely safe. There hasn't been any water wells affected, not one. They've drilled over 1 million wells. They haven't affected any water wells in 65 years of fracking. That's a complete and utter lie. Pennsylvania just announced last year 243, and that's a lie. It's far more than 243. I know that for a fact. I could take you into communities where the one community we had 86 houses paved on the map that their water was affected, and a lot of them had water buffaloes. Some of my neighbors, the one neighbor, Steph Halowich, that was a big precedent-setting case against Range Resources. They had a water buffalo in their garage. They were paying $500 a month for water. They gagged their children. They're 8 years old, 7 years old, 9 years old, their little boy and little girl were gagged that they could not talk about fracking for the rest of their life. That it's safe. This is fact. This is all filed in the courthouses. And you can find this online.
What do we request for a water test?
They just resumed fracking. The day after our ban was repealed, they resumed fracking in Denton, which really was just another twist of the knife. That didn't have to happen. What we did was we went to a community there across the street that's on well water, and we asked for testing that the Denton DAG group is going to pay for. You have to list the chemicals in there that you want. My suggestion is that you look, which I tried to find Frac Focus, which is a chemical registry, but I couldn't find where any of your companies here in Idaho had registered. But if you look in Texas under Frac Focus, you see what chemicals that the company is admitting to putting downhole, you will be able to tell what chemicals you want to be tested in your water.
In another lawsuit against Range Resources, in their deposition, they admitted that they use over 700 chemicals, 650 of them are carcinogens. And they didn't know all the chemicals that they used. That's in the deposition. And that case is ongoing, and it will be a precedent-setting case.
Other towns and cities have well sites next to homes, parks, and in town parks. What can we expect here in Idaho?
One of the saddest cases occurred where they drilled the well 180 feet from homes. Children in that neighborhood for over 18 months to 2 years have had 2 to 3 nosebleeds a week that they never had before. One of the boys, the mom was finding these tissues hidden all over the house and asked her son, "Why are you hiding these?" And he said, "Because Mom, when you see them, it makes you cry." The kids have nosebleeds, they're on rescue inhalers, there are headaches, rashes, hair falling out, sick dogs, you name it, and people are suffering from it.
I did not tell you folks that since I lost my job last year, I work for an organization called Damascus Citizens out of Wayne County, Pennsylvania. Millenville is the name of the town. And the director is Barbara Aaron. I do the health surveys now. I'm out in this miserable field. And you talk about depressing? Thank God I don't get depressed. I just get angrier and angrier. And I will not quit. There are many, many problems. We have a facility 3 miles from my house in Peters Township, Pennsylvania, called Southwestern Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project. They've been there for approximately 2 years. I know the director, I know everyone there. I send them people all the time. They work with UPMC, which is a hospital in Pittsburgh. They have a toxicologist there. People have their blood tested, their urine tested, and what they find is absolutely amazing. And these folks, a lot of these folks are in lawsuits. And I also send individuals that work for the industry. I know a lot of guys in the industry that have contacted me that are sick, that were driving the residual waste trucks handling the flow back.
How or where can you find out if your neighbors have signed leases? The courthouse. Isn't this industry highly regulated already? Don't they get big penalties or get shut down if they do things wrong?
What we're finding is that in Denton, when there were emissions or noise or lights, what we were finding was that in the state of Texas, the maximum fine for violating was $2,000 a day. It was cheaper for this industry to pay the fine and continue their flaring and continue their polluting than it was to stop it. I can't tell you how many times I've called state regulators. They came out and before they tested for anything said, we never find anything. When I look on the state sites, I find that the violations that less than 1% of any call that is made, there's no violation. Less than 1% of the time. So if you're going to count on a state agency, especially if one is in Texas who receives campaign contributions from the industry, you're going to need to do it yourself.
Follow the money. That's what's happening. You know, the Pennsylvania Health Department, this came out last year. I had a number of people call the Pennsylvania Health Department because they were having health issues from the drilling around them. You know what the health department has told the employees? Anyone calls, ignore the call. Pennsylvania Health Department. They're being investigated. That came from 2 whistleblowers from the health department. One who worked in Harrisburg and one who worked for 35 years for the department. This is what's happening.
What can those of us that are opposed to oil and gas exploration and drilling in Jim County do to stop this?
You're going to have to get like-minded politicians elected to your county commissioner's court, to your city council, to your mayor, to your state representative's office, to your state senator's office, and to your governor. That is the only way that you are going to be able to get a grip on it.
That's exactly right. Again, you have to follow the money. If you've got legislators that are in their pockets, you've got to vote them out. And you've got to start pressuring your government. You have to do what New York did. New York dogged Governor Cuomo constantly. Every place he went, you had people there. And I know that's hard to do. You know, this becomes, you become possessed with it. But once you know how bad it is, you know, you're fighting for your children. You're fighting for the future. And they're not going to have one. So, and you've got to stick together. And again, don't let them divide you.
And this isn't just a Jim County issue. I don't know if the 2 speakers can comment on this, about the new higher assessments on property in CAIA County, post-production costs pushed on landowners in Idaho. Okay, maybe Alma will talk about that later. How much money has CAIA County or New Plymouth made off the drilling there? We'll move on to this. Have either of the speakers had a problem with unscrupulous leasing agents? Are they licensed there?
I know in Texas that the landmen, as we call them, are unlicensed. We tried at a state level to get them. I mean, someone who cuts your hair in Texas is licensed. They have to follow state guidelines for ethics. In Texas, which from researching Idaho here, there's no license. They're contracted by an energy production company. They go out when they mislead people. The people tell the energy production company they're going to sue them for breaking a lease, and they tell them your deal was made with the landman, who's just a contract employee.
We brought that up years ago. I brought it up at a meeting a long time ago when I figured this out, and I said, the land people, I said, they should be like a real estate agent. I said, they should be licensed. I said, that they're out there and they lie constantly to the people. It's horrendous. I don't know how these guys sleep at night, but I know it's a big gain to them. And I know they have incentives too. I'm sure they all play out the same handbook. But like I said earlier, there is a lawsuit now. And I hope that it'll be a precedent-setting case against the landman and that company. because the folks in that, I think it's EQT, it's who the nuisance lawsuit is against, because people also were sick from what happened. And of course, you got to prove all this, blah, 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 blah. But, and that's, that's usually hard to do with the chemicals and this, that, and the other. But it's going to be interesting to see how this pans out since they're going to sue the landman.
How will drilling affect my property values?
Well, as I quoted earlier, I mean, our neighbor's home was valued at $340,000, and once the drilling and fracking was completed and they were left to pick up the pieces, it was valued at $87,000. The company had to buy them out, and they moved on, forcing them to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We were lucky we got out with that much property value loss, but we did full disclosure before we sold our property.
Well, as I stated earlier, my farm, when I went to the bank, and my farm was paid for, the bank would not give me a loan to support my lawsuit against Range because I wanted to mortgage the property just to get a little bit of money instead of spending my savings. And that's what I'm doing now. I'm just going through my savings like you can't believe. And I did nothing wrong. It's what they did. But I just want my day in court. That's all I want is my day in court. And I hope to God that it's going to happen.
Once the drilling is done, will there be any noise or lights? How long will it be before 24-hour, 7-day-a-week drilling?
Well, it depends. I mean, I've lived through 2 sites now. One was 3 wells, one has been 5 wells. So you have to realize there's a pad site that's approved, that I'm helping some people that's 20 wells. So the length of the time is going to depend on how many wells are there. Once those wells, they finish with those wells, I just got a text from Denton that one of the condensate tanks is blown up today in a neighborhood and has harmed some workers and some people who are on the site. So just because the rig goes away, the frac trucks go away, the well stimulation goes away, you're stuck with the condensate tanks that they have to come and empty all the time. So you've still got the big truck traffic that's going to come in and out of there.
That's exactly right. Condensate tanks come in, the brine tankers, as they call brine or residual waste, that do not have hazardous placards in Pennsylvania. I don't think they have them anywhere in the United States, actually, because that's another loophole for the industry. And what that flow back, which is actually coming into that tank from that wellbore, is toxic. And the brine tankers and residual waste trucks should have hazardous placards on them, because the condensate tanks have hazardous placards on them. And guys come in and out of that off of your property all night long. 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, my lap would be barking. I would get up, I would go look to see which way it was going. Was it going to a well site? Was it a pickup truck? Was it Ergon who was taking drip gas out, which goes to a refinery? Because I also had my garage broken into by a roughneck. They took my skid steer mini excavator. I went to court over that. I mean, I haven't told you half the things that happened to me. Trust me, I didn't even scratch the surface. So, things change. Your peacefulness is gone, and you never know who is on your property. Do you like strangers on your property? Well, that's what you have, and you don't know what their records are. You have no idea. You have children. You don't know who they are.
Will drilling, or when it is done, will my livestock be affected?
I work with Sharon Wilson from Earthworks, and she has what's called a flare camera. And she takes it out to these sites after these wells are completed, and it detects any kind of emissions that are coming off of there. Not heat emissions, benzene, toluene, things that are being emitted. And what these wells are leaking from the day after completion until 5 years after completion has to affect livestock. And that's not even considering if you have an accident on there, if you have an earthquake and a shell casing cracks and it contaminates your water. I cannot believe that something like this could occur on a ranch. We weren't willing to take the chance, and it wouldn't affect livestock.
I had farmers all around Pennsylvania call me about losing livestock, and I looked up some of the people up that lost livestock that I had heard about, just to see what kind of stories I could find out. A fellow in Greene County lost 21 head, 18 of them were brood cows. He never got paid a dime. They think what was happening, they were dumping the flow back at night, and they were dumping on the road, and then the cattle got into it. I've got pictures. This farmer here, this calf, I took the liver out, a piece of its liver. And the liver, if you notice its eyes, its iris, the pupil is white. Terry Greenwood, who we lost last year, actually this week, it's a year that he's passed away, he lost 10 calves. They were stillborn, they had white eyes and blue eyes. They were drinking out of a small pond. He also asked the DEP to test the mud in the water. They wouldn't do it. That's something else in my pond. I asked the DEP to test the sediment. I said, whatever was in that pond, I said, is in the mud. And I had cattails, 17, 18 feet thick around the back of the pond. Again, this pond was almost 3 acres. They died. All the cattails died in about a year's time. DEP would not test the mud. And I got a letter that stated it had nothing to do with the drilling practice. How does it not have anything to do with the drilling practice if you won't test the mud? It's all covered up. And EPA just came out with a report about drilling. That the water contamination has been, it's not been widespread. They're a goddamn liar. I work with the EPA. They're not telling the truth. It's because the industry is stepping on them. That's what's happening. It's the political pressure. Because we could prove them wrong over and over and over again.
What kind of bonding and insurance is needed for gas wells and such?
We fought for that in our new ordinances. We asked for $5 million bond. We asked for $24 million insurance coverage for spills and for environmental cleanup. So these companies will only want to give you small amounts of bond or insurance company. You're going to have to demand that your county do that, because otherwise the taxpayers are going to be saddled with the cost of this.
If pollution were so widespread, why wouldn't we be hearing more about this more of the time?
The media is suppressed. They own the media. Our Channel 2 back home is all pro-gas. All advertisements are on there. They are not reporting what's actually happening. We try to get so many stories out, you can't get them to do any stories. All I can tell you is, if you want to come to Pennsylvania, and I've said this over and over many, many times, come to PA, I'll give you a tour. I'll open your eyes.
I think it's in the industry playbook, but like I stated, the family that was bought out, they had to sign a non-disclosure agreement to get the industry to agree to give them enough money to move to a safe place for their children. There was also one of my neighbors who was deathly ill. They found drilling chemicals in her blood and in her urine. She sued in court. She won. They wanted her to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and she refused. It went to a jury, and the jury awarded Lisa Parr $3 million. She can speak about it. But the industry playbook is if you want to take some money, you want to move your kids to a safe place where you don't have to worry about them being poisoned, you need to sign this letter saying you will never, ever speak of this again. And I can tell you, if it was my kids, I would sign that letter and move them to a safe place. I'm sad to say.
Have any studies been done on illnesses related to fracking and gas drilling?
Dr. Michelle Bamberger from Cornell University, she's a vet, but she worked with small animals. Long story short with her, she has a book out there about fracking. It's Dr. Michelle Bamberger and Robert Oswald, her husband. And she put a book together regarding the people that were losing livestock and animals. There have been some, I shouldn't say there's been major studies with the animals. You know, it's tough to get your hands on some of these animals. You need to, when they die, you've got to, first of all, it costs a lot of money to have the animal tested. There's one lawsuit that's pending right now. This horse was a barrel on scale. She won world on this particular horse for barrel racing. And they had the horse for 16 years, and they ended up putting the horse down because they had two vets, one from Penn State and one from Ohio State on this horse. And the horse was crystallizing inside. And they had to put it down. And it was in the water, in their spring water. And this is a major lawsuit. Like I said, you have to go to the pathonetary's office and dig up information. But it's the Stacy Haney case. You might find something online because there are a number of people there. That's why they're exempt. That's why all these exemptions come into play, because they know there's a lot of things here that are hard to prove. And they don't want the liabilities. That's why they have the federal exemptions in place. Think about that. Why are you exempt from this Superfund Act? That's hazardous cleanup. Why are you exempt?
Will our county emergency services be trained, and will gas and oil industry pay for equipment and training?
There's a lawsuit in the city right next to us now. We just had a gas well explosion where a condensate was struck by lightning and it caught on fire. Our fire department went out and did not know how to fight that fire. We had to call the company that said, we're 7 hours away, we're going to tell you how to put it out on the phone. We had Arlington, Texas, which is one of our neighbors. They said, look, it's going to cost money to train our firefighters, so that's going to be a fee that we're going to add on to each well that you receive a permit for. The city and the industry is now suing the city because they don't want to pay that fee. That's not a good neighbor.
Back home, we have a large cryogenics plant that's owned by Mark West. And in that township, they opened the gates up for this, it's roughly 200 acres now. And it's incredible. People wanted to know about the evacuation plan, because this is where they freeze out the propane, butane, hexane, ethane with the huge tanks. These tanks are, I don't know how many gallons they would hold to check. And there are a number of them everywhere. So the people wanted to know about evacuation plan. The township said we cannot discuss the evacuation plan because of Homeland Security.
What if an owner signs a lease and sells the home? Is the new owner's loan in jeopardy? And what if it was in the 55% rule? How will the bank know if the new buyer did not sign in front of the notary, not legal? Can the bank still pursue the owner? Okay, we move on. What part of the Constitution allows people to be forced to compromise their property rights, whether we choose to have land drilled or not? what can we do to make sure individual property rights are protected?
That just goes back to getting politicians elected who are like-minded. I mean, this all comes down to campaign contributions, what industry is willing to spend, and they're willing to spend whatever it takes to, by the Texas Constitution, the Idaho State Constitution, or the U.S. Constitution.
Can you hear that one more time?
What part of the Constitution allows people to be forced to compromise their property rights, whether we choose to have land drilled or not? What can we do to make sure individual property rights are protected?
Well, I would say that to protect your property rights, again, you would definitely have to stand up together, and you're all going to have to be on the same page and go after these politicians, because back in Pennsylvania, it's Article 1, Section 27. They destroyed our Pennsylvania Constitution, where we have, again, Article 1, Section 27. We have the right to clean air, clean water, the aesthetic values, et cetera, to be handed down to the future generations. And our governors, Rendell, previous, and Corbett, have stepped all over our Constitution. And now Wolf, who is in place, they're bird-dogging him, just like they bird-dogged the governor of New York. So, and of course, New York has the moratorium, and Maryland has the moratorium. Nearly, 2.5 years until they get the science done and health studies done.
I have a question here for Cathy. I'd like to hear more about the health effects since you're a nurse. Thank you.
Neuropathies in the feet. A lot of these chemicals will affect the nervous system. You'll have pain and burning in your feet. I've seen hair fall out. I've seen rashes. I've seen respiratory problems. I've seen people with a disease process that maybe is managed, a heart disease, that once these wells go in and they're exposed to the chemicals, then these disease processes are exacerbated. So I've seen enough that I've spent 6 years of my life fighting for this. I mean, it's just not right that you can't be in your own home. Your kids can't play in your yard without being sick. The child I told you about with the nosebleed, his mother called me the other day and said, I can't even teach him how to ride a bicycle because he can't stay outside long enough for me to teach him how to do that. Now think about that. Without getting a nosebleed, without having to use his rescue inhaler.
This is for Ron. We own mineral rights in Ohio. 2 years ago, Hasse Oil paid us for a 5-year rental lease. But now that they are drilling, the proceeds are being held in an account pending a Supreme Court of Ohio decision on if mineral rights owners or property owners will receive the proceeds. The first hearing was May. The next hearing regarding the situation will be in June. What have you heard regarding this, and what are your thoughts?
I have not heard anything about that. Ohio, Governor Kasich is 100% oil and gas. He has done everything over there to keep things hushed up with issues and problems. But I do talk to people over there that are in the various groups that are fighting this, and they are having issues with water. They are having issues with health. It's the same song and dance everywhere you go. It doesn't change. It's just a different town, different names, different places, but it's the same thing. But I have not heard anything about that issue with Hasse.
And final question for Cathy about split estates. What rights do you have to keep gas people off your land?
We've been told by county law officials, we were told by the city law and by state law, we can't keep them off of our property because we only own the surface, they own the minerals. The mineral rights supersede everything else. I told one politician in Texas I feel like a squatter I live on my land, I pay the taxes, I do the upkeep, I build the fences, but I have no rights. And it's absolutely right. When you think you have children playing there and the person who's coming on your land could be a child molester. You don't know. You don't know because you have no rights.
Well, Cathy's 100% right. The one individual that I had come onto my property from the DEP, I didn't know anything about him. And I've said many times you could talk to a tree and have a better conversation. I had another DEP employee replace him because he had had a heart attack and died. And the DEP rep said, Ron, do you know the history of Sherman? I said, no. Alias Hatchet Jack. Shot and killed his dad and his aunt and dad and his mother. Chopped them up and buried them, went to prison, got out of prison, went to work for the DEP. So again, you don't know. That's one of the biggest deals here. There are too many strangers, and let me tell you this right now. Crime goes up, just like I had that roughneck that I caught. That was a really great night that night. He's lucky he's alive, to tell you the truth. The other dude took off running. And they were both from, well, one was from Colorado. He was only here 4 days working for Patterson Drilling. I don't know where the other kid was. I never met him. But crime. Our town, we had a cop who was temporary. We had break-ins left and right. Because these guys are transient. And they watch what goes on when you leave, when you come back. And we had crime. I knew a guy that worked for our district attorney's office, and he told me the crime goes up. He said a minimum of 10%. He said, man, we're having a hell of a time up here with all these cases that are coming in. And he said, we don't need any more of this. He said, we got enough. Our hands are full as it is. Get out these guys.
Okay, a big round of applause for Cathy and Ron. Thank you. Let's also give Kevin Miller a big round of applause. Thank you so much for being here, man. I really appreciate the support. Ladies and gentlemen, as I'm going through my daily travels, I talk to a lot of people, and generally the tone of discourse about where a country is going, no matter what a political affiliation they have, I hear it constantly. I don't hear anybody that's happy with the course of our country. Our country has turned upside down. A lot of people say that, yeah, well, we have a republic. It's a capitalistic society. But it's turned upside down because in a capitalistic society, when you do good work, you put out a good service, your customer will vote for your dollar and they'll buy your service and your product will be successful. What's happening right now, we're turning to a corporalistic society. This is where we can't vote with our dollars anymore. At least limited, because you are forced to do business with them. And that is what's happening in this state, is that we are forced to do business with them. They have it locked up if you own your land. If you don't own your land, your mineral rights, you own your mineral rights. If you own your surface rights, don't own your surface rights. If they want every last drop of oil here, they're going to get it. It's nothing about gas and oil. It's not about gas and oil. This is happening in many different fronts. I just want to let you know that. Also, this is not just an Idaho issue, a Gem County issue. This is an Idaho issue. They're planning and going all the way from La Grande through the Snake River Valley, all the way to eastern Idaho. There's through the whole entire Treasure Valley, there is land that's been leased. Also, TVOI, thank you so much for being here. They will be doing interviews after. If anybody would like to make a comment, they would welcome that. They'll be back over here. And finally, in closing, this program is being recorded and will be on our website, integrityandaccountability.org. And please take a moment to fill out the forms.
If you want to support us, we would love that. If you have any comments, we would love to have that as well. If you'd like to give a donation, if you'd like to join our organization, we'd love that as well. The bottom line is that one or two people are a lot more powerful and they have another 10 next to them, and another 10 next to them, and another 10 next to them. This is not about oil and gas. There's so many different facets that this is happening right now in our country.